Katie, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks, Adam, for having me.
Everyone should understand that we were going to have a reception and then be on the beach talking, but the weather didn't cooperate. So instead, here we are sober for this conversation.
You might be.
Excellent. I want to start by giving everybody a sense of how interesting and unusual your background is, given your role right now. So you were, as Robert mentioned, you were a federal prosecutor, but not just any federal prosecutor, you actually were involved on the other side of some of the issues that we're talking about today. So would you just briefly talk about what Mt. Gox was and what Silk Road was and what your role in them were?
Sure, so let me back up. Actually, before I was involved in the crypto space as a prosecutor, I actually was doing national security and terrorism cases, cartel cases back on the East Coast, organized crime, prison gangs, and a lot of violent crime. So my foray into the crypto space was somewhat later in my DOJ career. So for Mt. Gox, as many of you know, Mt. Gox was hacked several times to the tune of about $500 million. And so naturally, that was something that the Justice Department was interested in investigating whodunit. And then you mentioned also, Adam, the Silk Road case?
Yes.
So I actually did not personally prosecute the mastermind of the Silk Road. That was done by my colleagues out here in New York. What I prosecuted was actually what I'll call the twist of the Silk Road, which was, unfortunately, we had some corrupt federal agents who were involved in investigating the Silk Road. Secret Service agent who was detailed to the NSA and just happened to be the US government's nationwide expert in Tor, and also a DEA agent. So I prosecuted those individuals.
I'm glad you reminded me that you prosecuted violent crimes. You did the things that prosecutors do. And I know you were really passionate about that. Talk about why you were a prosecutor and how, and was it difficult leaving it?
So let me take the second question first. And was it difficult leaving? No. And I think the reason it was no is because I had done it for well over a decade. And so I had tried a lot of different kinds of cases, investigated a lot of different kinds of crimes. And my earliest boss once told me that a good prosecutor has a shelf life of about 5 to 7 years. And it takes about 5 years to know what you're doing. And I think that's very true. And so having been a prosecutor for 12 years, naturally it was just time for me to move on. And so I felt like I had been there and done that. I loved almost every minute of it. Not every minute, of course, but I just loved my job for all of those years. And when I started giving away trials, and knowing,
giving them away to other prosecutors,
exactly.
In other words,
Yeah, exactly.
That's like a venture capitalist saying, I don't really want to invest in that good one, you take it instead.
Well, and also, frankly, there was something to mentoring other people. I was taking up a spot that someone else, with the real fire in the belly could have come in, and certainly people did come into that role after I left.
So let's segue into cryptocurrencies, the blockchain, this new world that really this entire conference is about. You were involved with a task force. Explain what the task force did and what its concerns were, since this was criminal investigations, and yeah. I'll let you do it.
Sure. So actually, I stood up the task force, and it was the U.S. government's first cryptocurrency task force. And we had the FBI and the DEA and the Secret Service and the CFPB and the SEC and state and locals, so you name it. We had a lot of representation on it. And actually, how it started was in I would say early days of crypto, although some crypto OGs say that's not early. 2008 is early. So this was in 2012.
Because that's when
Satoshi's
what's
white
his
paper.
name? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. But in 2012 for the government, those were early days for crypto. And I actually was asked in 2012 by my chiefs at the Justice Department to help shut down Bitcoin. Could I prosecute Bitcoin? And that was the first time I had ever heard of cryptocurrency or Bitcoin.
Now, why would somebody in the federal government want to shut down Bitcoin?
Well, the perception back then in the government was that Bitcoin was a criminal technology, it was only going to be used by criminals, and it really had no other use, right? That was the perception. And we quickly realized that was not the case, looked into it more, and very quickly realized that would be like saying, let's shut down the internet, or probably more aptly, like, let's shut down cash, because cash can be used by criminals, and indeed is used by criminals, and so let's shut that down. It would not be possible, nor would it be desirable.
But there were a disproportionate, almost sounds like a value judgment. There were a lot of people using Bitcoin for bad reasons at the time. I suspect partly because it was brand new, but also because the technology lent itself to it. What did you learn?
What I learned is that criminals are often early adopters of all new technologies. Internet's one example, mobile phones, arranging meetups, and certainly social media, all kinds of things. And cryptocurrency, and Bitcoin was no exception. And so the government, and certainly now I don't shy away from the idea that bad people are going to use this technology. That's of course true.
Okay, so let's transition away from your government career into your money-making career. You were, by government standards, very early in saying, let's look at this new thing. There's potential criminal behavior going on here. We need to understand it. To saying, okay, I'm moving into a new phase of my career, and I'm going to go do that stuff that people are doing. I want to, and so you have become a very prominent proponent of cryptocurrencies, a defender of the concepts. And so I want to play a clip of an exchange that you had with somebody on the subject. It should be on these monitors in a moment.
Yeah, it was clear right from the beginning that there were things you could do with the internet that you couldn't do otherwise. I mean, I was filing magazine columns on black and green glowing screens right from the very beginning. It's not at all clear even now that there's anything that you can do with crypto that you can't do other ways.
Okay, that was the noted cryptocurrency expert Paul Krugman speaking in an exchange with you, and then his point was, look, I got the internet, I don't get this cryptocurrency stuff. Rather than play what your response was then, what is your response now to him?
About why cryptocurrency can be useful.
Yes.
Right. Well, I think the biggest point I made back to Mr. Krugman was, look, this is about much more, as we see it, than just currency. And it's easy to say, sitting here in Montauk or in San Francisco, why is this needed, right? We have payment applications, we have Venmo, we have PayPal. I can pay for a cup of coffee with cash, and there's no reason I need cryptocurrency. But there's something that distinguishes people like us from people in other areas of the world, and a lot of people in the other areas of the world don't have bank accounts. In fact, over 1.7 billion people, about 30% of the world's population, doesn't have a bank account. So if you don't have a bank account, you can't take advantage of things like Apple Pay or Venmo or PayPal. Yet people in those situations also need to transfer value, right? We're in this day and age of online everything. I mean, and they have mobile connected smartphones, right? So it's online everything, you need to transfer value, and I've written that that's increasingly a basic human need, the ability to transfer value. So I think that was one of the points I made to Mr. Krugman. The other point I made to him was, it depends what we accept as good enough, even for us who have bank accounts. Have you ever tried to make an international wire?
Yeah, I know how cumbersome it is, and slow, right?
And costly, right? Because there are so many middlemen. And I'll give you an example. I actually had, this is kind of ironic, because I was investigating one of the biggest money laundering cases the Justice Department ever did. And I went over to Poland, and I had to pay for my Airbnb with PayPal. And PayPal froze my account. Why? For suspected money laundering. True story. And it remained frozen for weeks. In fact, I finally had to go get out money to pay the Airbnb host in cash. And it, by the way, remains frozen to this day, because who wants to call up and deal with these systems? And now I'm saying that about PayPal. Imagine if you're dealing with some of your banks. You're trying to send money abroad. You're trying to buy something from a website overseas. And not to trivialize it, I mean, these are use cases I'm coming up with, but people have all kinds of reasons that they want to transfer value. So to us, crypto just presents this new opportunity of a way of moving the actual funds. And I don't mean a promise of the funds, a digital IOU. I mean the bare instrument itself, the actual money, to someone down the street or across the globe.
Okay, so this notion of future utility, this notion of banking the unbanked, this is this is eventually going to lead us into a conversation about Facebook and Libra. We've been discussing it all afternoon, but you're the first person officially involved, and so we're going to talk about that. But first, I want to ask you a mood question. You joined Andreessen Horowitz about how long ago?
A year ago.
Okay, a year ago, shortly after, I believe, Andreessen Horowitz raised how much, 350?
350 million. We closed the fund and I joined. I was announced. I had actually been involved with the firm, and then we announced it the fund the same day I joined.
So hundreds of millions of dollars to make investments related to cryptocurrency, blockchain technologies, and then Bitcoin crashes and nobody has anything good to say about this stuff. Now here we are, things are, both Bitcoin itself is moving back up, not to where it was before, and I think there's a lot of enthusiasm around Facebook. And so, what was it like during that time when the skies were looking very dark? Were you worried? Were your partners worried?
I have to say no, and let me give you some context for that. Don't forget, Adam, before I joined Andreessen Horowitz as a general partner, I actually joined the board of companies like Coinbase. So I'm on the board of directors as an independent at Coinbase and some others. And so I had seen these movements before in price at Coinbase. I remember being in the Coinbase office the day the price hit 10,000. And of course, that was a mood of, I think, euphoria in the crypto space. But I was also along for the ride with Coinbase when the prices also, you use the word crash, I use the word correction. The market is up and down. And I think that, look, the fact of the matter is we're long-term investors. We are not a crypto hedge fund, okay? We are a venture capital fund. And so we take a 7 to a 10-year horizon. And we take venture-style risk, venture-style bets. And so if you think of, I'll give you another example, like Slack is a great example, right? You can all read the news about Slack and what they've filed for. Slack pivoted in its early career as a company a couple times, and in fact, imagine if along the way, and now Slack is poised to become a very successful, although I'm not giving investment advice, the press reports are that it will be a successful IPO. Imagine if there had been a real-time price feed attached to the price of what Slack was worth every single day when it went through pivots, when it went through ups and downs that any kind of venture technology that's getting built goes through. So I think crypto is just really no different from
Totally
a lot
fair.
of things, like whether you're talking about drones, which are hard from a hardware perspective to make, flying cars, you name it, cryptocurrency, these things go through ups and downs. They take years to build and come to fruition, particularly for the mainstream consumer. And here in crypto, we have this real-time price feed. So I think of it as a distraction.
It's like a mood ring.
Yeah.
It's interesting. You say correction, not crash. What's complicated about those subjective terms is that we're talking about something whose price fell tremendously, and it didn't have any value at 10,000, and didn't have any value at 4,000, and doesn't have any value at 9,000.
So.
I'm suggesting and asking you to respond to that Bitcoin, as one example, it doesn't have any intrinsic value.
Well, sure, this is like, you're sounding like Paul Krugman back at that debate in Mexico City, Adam. I'll tell you what I told him, which is that why do we ascribe value to gold? He'll tell you, oh, because jewelry, you can make stuff out of it. Gold has a $7.5 trillion market cap. Can you really make that much jewelry? Is it really worth $7.5 trillion?
Understood.
It's because people ascribe value to it. The Yap stones in Micronesia, have value. Why? Because people believe that they have value and they can be used as kind of, so we think of, for example, in the case of Bitcoin, like a digital gold, if you will. Because of some of the volatility, historically, as you yourself noted, it hasn't yet achieved its vision of, Satoshi's vision of being a medium of exchange, right? Peer-to-peer medium of exchange. However, I think we've just been talking about Bitcoin. We should talk about other things. We should talk about the advent of things like stable coins and some of the other new technologies that are being built.
So the advent of stablecoins is the perfect transition to Facebook's grand initiative, which you've explained exactly so everybody understands the context, what Andreessen Horowitz is and your role is.
Sure, so our role in the Libra Association, so we don't call it Facebook Coin, it's the Libra Association, and the cryptocurrency will be called Libra.
But it is correct to refer to it as a stable coin?
Well, it depends on, I refer to it as a stable coin. I think the correct, because it's not pegged to the dollar, unlike some other stable coins, the correct terminology is a cryptocurrency with low volatility.
Okay.
To me, that's a mouthful, so I still call it a stable coin. And the idea is that it will be a cryptocurrency, it's digital, and it has all the benefits of cryptocurrency, but that it doesn't have the volatility.
Explain as best you can today what the governance of this association will be.
Well, that's what we're all coming together for, is to figure that out. So you asked about what is Andreessen Horowitz's role. We're one of 28 founding members, and there's a council now. Libra Association has 28 members, and we are one of the 28 members. We will have a vote equal to the other 27 members in terms of important governance decisions that are going to be made over the next few months.
Over the next few months, and
Yes.
so Facebook has just one vote in that,
They have
in that
one.
28.
That's correct.
Are you going to get together in a room and have a physical meeting?
I believe we will.
Has
yes.
one happened yet?
Not yet. We have spoken with partners, but it's not in a meeting context because, let me tell you why. Each of the partners had to, it wasn't clear who all of the partners were going to be until the announcement yesterday. Many knew who the partners were going to be. However, there was never a setting in which we would have all come together yet. So that process begins now, and we are all in touch now. Meetings are being planned, and documents will be prepared. So I can't tell you too much about the governance right now because the association hasn't yet had those really important debates. That's the point of having a voice at the table.
There was a fair amount of regulatory commentary yesterday.
Saw that.
Given your background and given your relationships with the regulators, give us the crystal ball on what is going to happen here.
Well, I think our compliance officer, we're an RIA, he would say I don't have a crystal ball. So, and that's
I understand.
Of course true.
Yeah.
We don't know what will happen. I can tell you a few things, Adam. One, we had, as you know, we just held a summit, Andreessen Horowitz, in May, last month. And we had regulators from every single one of the major regulatory organizations in Washington, D.C., and by the way, from other jurisdictions, states, and also other countries, come together in San Francisco with a group of key thought leaders in crypto. And we had a closed-door session for a full day, 250 people approximately, where we discussed this very thing. What should the regulations be? What ought they need to look like? And how do we move this forward in a way that both fosters innovation, but that is protective of consumers, where identities could be traced if there's an appropriate court order, for example. So I don't have a crystal ball. What I can tell you is these are very important conversations, and as I said, debates. And I do think they will be debates, because there are very different points of view, even now within the Libra Association, that we expect. And so these debates are going to take place. A charter will be formed, governance documents will be formed, and I imagine, although I don't know that it's been committed to, that those will be released.
I want to ask you one more leading question that's regulatory in nature and then throw it open. And I want to give us permission to wonk out a little bit here because it's complicated, but it's important. The SEC filed suit against the company called Kik, which had done an ICO, an initial coin offering. And the crux of the matter, you wrote about it before the suit, but not since the suit, is that the SEC is saying, you issued securities here, but you didn't file those securities with us, and we're suing you as a result. You violated securities laws. So your take on the suit, and I guess the fundamental question to dumb it down is, are these things securities, or are they currencies, or is the answer a little bit of both?
I think the answer is both. It depends on the project. And of course, Kik is just one of over 1,000 kinds of cryptocurrencies. They're Kik's cryptocurrency, and by the way, we're not investors in Kik. I just wrote about it out of interest. Why did I write about it? I wrote about it because people, I think, are really focused on the SEC. That's the agency in the US that has made a lot of noise and put out a lot of guidance on crypto. And I think a lot of other agencies, by the way, are even more important in crypto. Agencies like the Treasury Department, for example, which many in this room are undoubtedly familiar with given the topic. But the SEC had put out the most guidance to date, and I wanted to explain to readers, first of all, this is just one agency, and it's, Kik would tell you, or that KIN is not a security. And so I took a look.
KIN is their cryptocurrency.
Exactly. So I took a look at it of what might happen. I wrote it about 2 weeks before the enforcement action hit, and one of the things I said could happen was, of course, an enforcement action. The SEC filed in the Southern District of New York. One thing to note is that the law is much more favorable to the SEC and to the government in New York than it is, on this point, than it is in, for example, San Francisco. There's an old Supreme Court case from the 1940s that governs and answers the question for us of whether cryptocurrencies would be, well, doesn't answer the question of whether cryptocurrencies would be securities, but what is a security? What are the characteristics of a security? And that test, since 1944, a lot of courts across the country have had occasion to examine what the rules are. And courts in different jurisdictions have ruled very differently.
So what did you make of the SEC's arguments, since you've had a chance to read them carefully?
Well, one of the things I said in my blog was that KIC had some really compelling, important arguments, but that it was important that we didn't just take those arguments alone at face value. Because one thing I learned as both a federal clerk to some federal judges and also in my career as a lawyer is that there are always two sides to every story. And I would read one brief and think, oh, this side is the winner, and then I would read the next brief and say, nope, never mind, they're the winner.
Sure.
So I thought that KIC made some really compelling arguments. I also think the SEC has made some equally compelling arguments. I think that it will come down to whether or not there was a common enterprise between the token purchasers, those who purchased KIN, and the foundation, the KIC Foundation. And I think that the law, the standard that will be applied in New York is a pretty easy standard for the government to meet. Remember, this isn't a criminal case. People sometimes think, oh, the SEC, it's a criminal case, you can go to jail. False. The SEC only has civil powers. As a result, the civil preponderance of the evidence standard is going to apply, which isn't that hard for the government to prove.
Okay, that's interesting that they have, in your professional judgment, they have an advantage just based on precedent in the Southern District of New York. Questions, please. There's one right up front, please. Come right there. Just tell us who you are, please.
Alex Lashinsky, I'm with Celsius Network. So the blockchain is 30 years old, the Bitcoin is 11 years old. We haven't had really a killer app, something that brought in 1 billion people into this, right? You're managing a $350 million fund. You're probably hoping for the 100x return. Walk us through a thought process of how you decide what's a good investment, what's a bad investment.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Well, the thought process that I've been applying is, first of all, one of the things we look to is this a category? What is the addressable market? Which is no different than any other kind of venture investment, right? So the two categories we think about for smart contract platforms or protocols are like world computers. Will there be a winning protocol or platform or two? Because if so, we think that's going to capture a huge amount of value. So one is category. The other category we look at is what I'll call internet money. And in internet money, we put into that category investments we've made like Cello, who I know you'll hear from tomorrow. Libra certainly falls into that category.
Cello's in the room, by the way.
Cello's in the room.
Here,
oh.
Yep.
And so we make those kinds of categories. So we look at, first of all, the scale of the opportunity to see, as you point out, we have a fiduciary duty to our LPs to generate returns. We also look very importantly, and this is certainly true in the case of Cello, is team. And have these people built a business before? Can they recruit? Can they scale? Do they have a good go-to-market? And that might sound like obvious things, but it's equally true in cryptocurrency as it is in any other element or any other vertical. When we have a bio fund too, we have a consumer fund, an enterprise fund. Those are the same things we look at, and we apply them with equal force in crypto.
You said earlier, by the way, that you're not a hedge fund, but if I remember correctly from Robert Hackett's excellent profile of you, this crypto fund does have unusual authority to actually buy currencies.
Yes, we have, and we've never sold, just to be clear, we've never sold.
So when you say you're not a hedge fund, your point is we're not getting in and out.
We're not trading. We're not trading in and out. I mean, we could have sold Bitcoin at a high, but we don't feel that our expertise is in trading. What you're referring to, Adam, is we are now a registered RIA, which means we can hold. We're not subject to that 20% exemption that other venture funds are for holding things that might be securities. Say we wanted to buy, for example, KIN. Things that the SEC might determine are securities. We don't have that restriction. So we can buy tokens all we want, but we do not, we as a fund in our investment thesis do not trade.
Very good. Please. Yes, right there, please. And then I'll come back there, yeah.
One of the things that you mentioned is you prosecuted money laundering cases in the past, and you also talked about the ease of value exchange.
Yes.
Aren't they fundamentally contradictory to one another in that an ease of value exchange actually makes money laundering easier, and in a lot of ways, cash is already digital in a lot of ways, and the friction for value exchange is introduced to do monetary policy controls and money laundering controls. So, like, how do you kind of square the two things?
That's a great question, and I have a long answer. I'm going to give you the short answer, but see me after for the long answer. I think, look, here's the fact of the matter. I spent over a decade, I prosecuted the biggest online money laundering case in the Justice Department's history. It's a case involving cryptocurrency, an exchange called BTCE, where the defendant was recently, is in extradition proceedings now. I spent 10 years prosecuting a lot of really bad actors and acts, frankly, so I care deeply about anti-money laundering laws. The notion, though, that crypto makes it easier to launder money, I find absolutely false. I will tell you that in the case of the Silk Road, in the case of the Mt. Gox hack, and in the case of BTCE, had crypto not been available to the government to use and blockchain technology to trace, we never would have been able to prosecute any of those cases. And I can tell you that with certainty. So I think that's an important point to remember. The other thing is right now, 99.9% of money laundering crimes succeed. Look that statistic up. That's not a Kathryn Haun statistic. You can Google it. It's put out, even Senator Grassley. I testified before the Senate on this, and the Treasury Department witness testified that 99.9% of money laundering crimes succeed, and that is true, despite that the financial services industry spends $20 billion a year to combat money laundering. So the point is, it's not working. Now, I still think money laundering is a big problem. I just think when you have digital, online kind of pieces of evidence, that's an important piece in the fight against money laundering, which you don't have. And you think, oh, maybe you have it with banks or wires. And I ask people who say that, how many banks or wires have you subpoenaed in your career? And how many times did you get back hits? Because I think there is a narrative out there that it's just very easy to launder money with crypto and not with other financial instruments. And by the way, the projects in which we're investing, and this is something that we also look for, is what is your approach to regulations? If you come in and pitch to Andreessen Horowitz and say, we don't care, we're decentralized, we have no regulators, that's not a good message for us to hear. We want to hear that you're thinking thoughtfully about it in a way that fosters, again, innovation, but that is still mindful that there are responsibilities and laws to be followed. And so we look to see, if you're a decentralized protocol, are projects that might build on top of you, are they going to KYC their customers? So I don't think that KYC and AML laws are incompatible with quick transfers.
Are you satisfied with that answer? Okay, but she wants to see you afterwards.
I have a
if you're
longer
not.
answer.
One last question back there, please. Yes.
So we were at lunch with Adam
Sorry,
and some
just
other folks.
introduce you.
Oh, I'm Jason Brown, founder of Tally, also
Hi.
one of the newest A16Z.
Congratulations on the announcement today.
Yeah. So one of the things we were discussing is just how thought out the actual scalability of the governance of this consortium is. And I think Adam used the UN example of, how, that's right, you brought that up, right, Adam?
At a lunch we had
at a
earlier,
lunch,
I
yeah.
compared the consortium with the governance of the United Nations. Sort of.
Oh.
Yeah.
There's a lot of members, but some members are more important than other members.
Yeah, and we're just trying to think about, like, in the long run, like how you add members and they have all these different interests and different incentives. Like, how do you make sure that actually it'll be effectively governed in the long run?
Great question, Jason. I mean, I think, look, fundamentally, I think of it like a constitutional convention. I'm an old con law nerd, so I think of it as a constitutional convention. You have all of these states, different interests, coming in to try and form this union, and you have a bit of that going on now, right? Not to pick on Rhode Island, but like Rhode Island is a small state, but it has still 2 senators. So does California, and there are different things that you do. I mean, mechanisms like that. I think one of the most important factors in us joining was that we will have an equal vote as any other council member. And let me repeat that. We will have the same vote at the table in the Libra Association as Facebook will have, as the other partners will have, as some of the NGOs will have. And they all have very different interests, but we all have the same the same voting rights. I think that's really important. So I don't know that it will work out perfectly, and the governance is yet to be determined. I haven't yet gone to any of these meetings that Adam asked about, so remains to be seen. But I do think one of the key factors in our decision to join was that we would, in fact, have, and all members will have, an equal vote.
So, you know, at lunch I thought the United Nations metaphor was a good one, but I love this Constitutional Convention metaphor even more. And what's really exciting is that I'd like to think that Fortune would have had a Brainstorm Constitution conference going on right while the Constitutional Convention was happening. And Katie, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you so much, Adam. Thank you for having me.